Welcome to my latest webinar, How to Talk About EMF and 5G with Friends, Colleagues, and Relatives. A quick reminder that I'm going to spend a bunch of time answering your questions after I complete these slides. I'm going to start with the questions that a lot of you submitted beforehand through that form that you received by email. But if you want to ask any questions, you can just scroll down this page and post them in the questions pod, and I'll get to as many as I can. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, just to give you some expectations, I'm going to start with an intro. It's super quick, gives a little bit of time for people to show up in the room. Then I'll aim to spend about 35 minutes on the main content. Then, as usual, I'll include a special offer that's only for people who are here live in the room, and then move on to Q&A. So quickly about me, my name is R. Blank. I'm CEO of SYB, CEO and founder. I used to teach on the faculty at USC Viterbi School of Engineering. I was a co-author, along with my father, of Overpowered, which is about EMF health effects, the science and business of EMF. And this follows a 20-year career in software engineering. Okay, so I'm going to turn off my camera until we get to the questions. Sorry to deprive you all, but the focus is, it's better to be on the slides. So I started SYB in 2012, and it was inspired by my father's legacy. For those of you who don't know, my father was Dr. Martin Blank, one of the world's leading EMF scientists. And I started it, SYB, to help people use technology more safely. And I do that in two ways, through education and through products. And when I talk about education, I'm talking about things like my blog posts, emails I send out, ebooks I write, videos I post to YouTube. And these are all about EMF science and safety tips about safer technology use. And I'm going through this all for background to contextualize today's presentation. And the education includes my healthy living tips, like you see right here, that are designed to be free and simple ways that people can reduce their exposure to harmful electromagnetic fields. And for products, I focused on electronics accessories, like you see here with my phone pouch, and apparel, like you see here with my boxers. And between my education, the education and products that I offer in the last 8 years, I know that SYB has made a big difference for millions of people, hundreds of thousands of customers, and hundreds of thousands more who've read, watched, and shared my educational materials. And all of this works because it's what you do with the technology that's closest to you that can make the biggest difference in your cumulative exposure to EMF radiation. But last year, I started to sense a change. Now, I want to emphasize it is still true that how you handle the tech closest to you, the tech that's most in your control, like your cell phones and your laptops and your Wi-Fi routers, this can have a really big impact on controlling your exposures. But as I watch the wireless companies roll out more and more technology, as I watched the 5G rollout begin, and word began to come down about projects like SpaceX's Starlink satellite network, my perspective started to shift a little. And I started hearing from more and more people around the world concerned about tower deployments and burgeoning Wi-Fi installations, on top of other concerns that have been around for a little longer, like smart meters. And I also started hearing from more and more people who are experiencing symptoms of electromagnetic hypersensitivity, which some people refer to as Wi-Fi allergies, but can have debilitating health effects. And more people wanted to know how they could protect themselves from all of these sources that are outside their immediate control. It's not like they can just turn the cell tower into airplane mode. And then this year, deployments have really taken off, and it's accelerated even more with many governments, both national and local municipalities, taking advantage of the COVID shutdowns to accelerate 5G deployments and the deployment of even more broadband satellites. And I started to realize that while it is still true that how you use the tech closest to you, the tech most in your control, that still matters tremendously. Increasingly, the sources outside of your control are becoming a bigger and bigger threat to our health. And it's no longer sufficient for me and SYB to focus only on those sources in our direct control. I needed to start figuring out ways to help people start protecting themselves from sources outside of their immediate control. So how could I do that? Well, stepping back, I noted how 2019 and 2020 had seen an unprecedented explosion in wireless deployments. But it wasn't all bad news, because as we've seen, there's actually been a growing global opposition to 5G around the world. Its most notable success has been in Brussels, the capital of Belgium and the seat of the European Parliament, where 5G was actually banned. That might be the most prominent success, but it's not nearly the only one. There are dozens and growing number of success stories to report from cities, towns, and counties from around the world where they have banned, stopped, or slowed 5G deployments. And I really have to underscore how unprecedented this is. Before this, there have been some scattered successes, with a tower being moved from a school, for example, or moved outside of a certain neighborhood. But there's never been this scale of successful opposition to the deployment of wireless technology due to health concerns. It's never happened before. And this is how people are taking back control from the wireless companies to start protecting themselves, their loved ones, and their neighbors from the harms of EMF. And I realized that many people around the world want to help make the world safer from EMF, but don't really know how. They don't know where to start. A lot of people naturally assume that the place to start is to protest, to become activists. And in some ways, they're correct. I mean, we wouldn't be seeing any of the anti-5G success stories from around the world if it were not for the efforts of these activists. But I realized there's another key ingredient, and that's learning how to talk to other people about your concerns in a way that gets them to listen and to take action. You don't need to get people to oppose 5G because you can focus on small steps. That is, in order to participate in the moves to take back greater control from the wireless companies, you don't need to be an activist, and you don't need to stop 5G in your local neighborhood. I mean, if you can, that's fantastic. But in order to contribute to the cause, you don't need to. Because if you can get other people to take small steps, that accomplishes 4 big goals. 1, these people, they're going to be a little healthier. If you get someone to stop carrying their cell phone in their pocket, that makes a big difference to their EMF exposure. It improves their health. 2, if you get them to make that change, they're going to be more likely to take additional steps, like maybe turning off their Wi-Fi router at night or making sure to always use an anti-radiation headset. 3, they're going to be more receptive to messages about EMF health effects. And 4, you've gotten practice and improved your skills. And this is what helps establish the groundwork, the context for movements like Stop 5G to become successful. Because the more people who've been activated with these messages, the more chance of success that movements like Stop 5G have. So maybe some of you do want to oppose 5G, but maybe some of you just want to get your children to stop carrying their phones in their pockets. It doesn't matter. The steps, the tactics, the message, it's the same. Because when you learn how to talk to others about your concerns with EMF, that's what gives you the tools to start making a change in areas that are outside of your immediate control. You can help others to live healthier, and you can set the stage for even bigger changes in the future. So that's why I wrote this ebook, and the link to download it was emailed to you in your confirmation of this webinar. It's a first step to help people like you learn how to talk about EMF with your friends, your family, and with your colleagues at work, and to do so in a way that helps realize positive change. Today's webinar is meant as a companion to the ebook. I'm going to cover some of the same content, but it's not a duplicate. And if this topic interests you, you really should take time to go through the steps in that guide. And then I realized when I was planning today's session, I also wanted to touch on 5G, because I know that's an important subject to a lot of you. And so I wanted to include that in a framing of how I feel comfortable and is effective to discuss my concerns with 5G. So, with all that as the introduction, let's get started. As you'll see, the entire curriculum I'm building is based around teaching you how to plan for this effort, the effort of learning how to talk to people about your concerns with EMF. Yes, sometimes EMF comes up naturally in discussion, perhaps at a party or with a friend talking about a story you heard on the news. But this course isn't about teaching you how to have those talks, those casual conversations at a party. This information is about helping you to have specific talks with specific goals in mind. And that means having a plan. And the first step in formulating your plan is to formulate your goals. If you don't know or haven't defined your goals, you will not have a high chance of success. And your goals will vary. You individually, your goals at different times will vary, and each of you attending today will have different goals. Maybe you want to help your teenager learn some safer technology habits, like not keeping their phone in their pocket. Or maybe your friend saw you using the SYB phone pouch and asked what it is, and you want to explain it without sounding alarmist or that you believe in myths. As you start down this process, you should remember that information and facts aren't all that matter. How you approach the topic, your manner and behavior, and how you treat the person you are talking to are all crucial elements. So here are a few points. I'm going to start with approaches to avoid. Don't be too emotional, don't use guilt, and don't shame people. And look, I get it. If you're aware of EMF, it's a really serious situation that needs to be addressed, especially if you have children. And that can make you emotional, understandably, about the topic. But in order to get people on your side, you need to utilize tools of persuasion and not engage in overbearing tactics that will just push people away. So, what tools can you use instead? Focus on your concerns about EMF and health. And this is one I strongly recommend. It's important not to dilute your argument with other issues, regardless of how related you think they are. For example, some of the related issues that often find their way into EMF discussions include privacy, technology addiction, and technology waste. But you will be more successful if you avoid throwing the kitchen sink into your discussions, and instead focus on the health aspects that concern you the most. So again, focus on the health. In addition, you want to focus on facts and science. It's really important to focus on the facts and the science. You can include your own interpretation, but make clear when you do that and distinguish your own views from the actual facts and the actual science. Always let the science and sound judgment lead the discussion. As you're talking to people, make sure to listen. It's important to listen to the feedback you're getting. That feedback can help you craft even better points the next time you try to have this same discussion. This one's really important. You need to recognize that tech addiction is real. It's not a metaphor. And it's a big influence on how people use all of these EMF emitting gadgets in their lives. And it's a big influence on how they're going to hear what you're telling them. You can't get people to change addictive behaviors overnight, but you can plant the seeds for them to start making changes. As you keep focused on the goal and follow some of these other suggestions for your approach, remember, if the person gets irritated or angry, then it's probably time to back away. If they were receptive to start and then seem antsy, then you've probably done all that you can in that moment. You've planted the seed. Let them ponder. You can step back and think of how to approach them again in the future. Remember, you do not need to convince everyone. You really just want to move the ball forward. Make more people more aware, not all people fully aware. You want to come armed with facts. Now, I'm very, very well aware that there is a ton of information that you could bring to your discussion. There are literally thousands of studies about EMF and health effects. It's more than any one person can memorize. So remember, the goal isn't to memorize everything or even most of it. And you definitely don't want to read your friends or relatives a big laundry list of facts. Instead, you want to have some points ready to ease into the topic. I have a lot of this information already covered in blog posts, ebooks, and videos. So rather than cover it here, I suggest that you check out this link, shieldyourbody.com/learn, and you can get immediate and free access to a lot of this information. And you can review it and try to pick the topics and facts that you think are the most interesting and most convincing to use in your advocacy. Beyond what I've already posted on my site and in the guide that accompanies this webinar, I've had many readers reply to me asking for citations, scientific studies, and other materials they can use to help them feel more prepared for these discussions and to share this material with others. So I just want to let all of you here today know that that's what I'm working on now. I'm working on creating the tool chest based off of your requests. So if you have requests, email in. You can just reply to any of the webinar emails and I'll get it with your requests. I obviously can't promise to do everything, but I definitely listen to the feedback I'm getting and consider it when I'm deciding what materials I can create. And this will be to help you with the information to take into your discussions. So just know that more of that is coming. This is a really important point, which is you have to offer specific alternatives. You can't just go in and tell someone to stop doing something unless there's an option. You're going to have much more success if you offer them an option. So for example, if your goal is to get your husband to stop using a Bluetooth headset, don't just say stop using that headset. Explain what he can do instead, like using speakerphone or a regular headset or an anti-radiation headset. Or if your goal is to have your neighbors remove Wi-Fi from their apartment, you can explain to them what effects EMF is having on them and then explain the ways that they can mitigate it. For example, by moving their router to a more distant location, by adding shielding to the router, or by switching to Ethernet. Or if your goal is to get your wife to stop sleeping with a phone on her nightstand next to your bed, maybe suggest she start by at least turning the phone into airplane mode when she falls asleep. Or if you're aiming to have your boss create an office environment with less EMF for you, then come prepared, for example, with a suggestion for an alternative office layout, along with a plan for how it would most easily be accomplished. The point is offer specific alternatives. The more of these that you have ready, the more likely you are to succeed in your goals. And I have several, sorry. I got ahead of myself. The next part is learning how to overcome common objections. When you have as many conversations about EMF as I do, you'll start to learn there are some objections that you'll hear repeated over and over again. So on the next few pages, I will include some of the most common objections I've heard and how I address them. Remember, you don't want to get into a fight with the person you're talking with. Then you're going to fail in your goals. I guarantee it. That will just make them shut down and reject everything that you have to say. Instead, you want to engage in a process of education, calmly explaining the facts as you see them. And if you know some of the objections that you're likely to hear, you can prepare your responses in advance. One that I often hear is, I hear science says this stuff is safe. And to be fair, this is based on some truth. While there are many studies, literally thousands of them, showing negative health effects from EMF, it is also true that there are scientific studies that show, for example, cell phone radiation does not lead to an increased rate of brain tumors. One way to respond is, first, acknowledge the truth of what the person is saying, and then you can point out that the majority of studies that show cell phone radiation is safe are funded by the wireless and tech companies. They're designed from the ground up to produce specific results. This type of science is so faulty that, as just one example, 2 separate courts in Italy threw out these industry-funded studies when they ruled that cell phones cause brain tumors. They concluded the scientific studies funded by the wireless industry were too biased to be included in their consideration of the verdict. So even courts recognize the bias and its impact on the science. Another objection that you'll hear is that there's no definitive proof that EMF is harmful. When you deal with EMF, you'll hear this phrase all the time. While it sounds cut and dry, the term proof is actually a tricky one, and it has multiple meanings. And we actually, my father and I have a longer section on this in the Overpowered book, because this argument was one that he felt deeply about. In logic and math, for example, you can actually prove something. 1 + 1 = 2. That's provable, definitively. But when you actually think about it, you'd be surprised at how few things in life can be definitively proven. For example, in a court of law, you don't seek definitive proof. You seek proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That is a different standard. And we sentence people to prison without definitive proof. In the United States, we actually sentence people to death without definitive proof. So why are they holding this decision to a higher standard than we apply in courts? Just like there's no concept of definitive proof in law, there isn't one in science either. In science, proof has a specific meaning. Proof means I've performed an experiment. Here are the results. You and others can attempt to repeat and verify the work. Here's my theory to explain the observations. What's more, scientific proof is often overturned by subsequent generations of scientists. This is how science grows and evolves, along with human understanding. But just because certain information does not constitute definitive proof, that does not mean that the information is inaccurate, misleading, or unreliable. What's more, governments and regulators have repeatedly taken action in the absence of definitive proof, based on a preponderance of the evidence. In the United States, for example, the Endangered Species Act applies a standard of evidence that is less than definitive proof in order for the Fish and Wildlife Service to designate a species as endangered. After all, once we have definitive proof that a species is extinct, it's too late to act to prevent their extinction. So while there is no definitive proof that EMF causes brain tumors, there is very concerning, scientifically accepted, peer-reviewed evidence from thousands of studies that cell phone radiation is carcinogenic. And this is why people should take action, even before we have definitive proof. All of us want to believe that if something is available for sale, it's safe. After all, if something isn't safe, they wouldn't be allowed to sell it. But that's not true, as we see time and time and time again. Here I have a photo of Volkswagen, which a couple of years ago had Dieselgate. In some cases, companies are allowed to sell dangerous products because the science hasn't caught up. We don't know that something isn't safe. That's not the case with EMF. In some cases, it's because the regulations lag behind the science. And in other cases, it's because the regulations are not actually enforced, as we saw with Dieselgate. When it comes to EMF, we know that this type of radiation is dangerous, but the regulations lag behind the science, and the limited regulations that do exist are not enforced. So when people say they wouldn't sell if it weren't safe, that is just unfortunately not true. I don't want to know that my cell phone will give me cancer because I'm not going to give up my phone anyway. So this really gets to the core of the challenge that you will face. And it gets back to what I was saying earlier about tech addiction being a really important part of what we all have to acknowledge as we engage in these discussions. The natural response of many people is going to be to not want to hear any of this information because people have such a deep and in many cases addictive relationship with their EMF emitting technology. And in certain states, I know I used to live in California, a lot of people, their whole income depends off of the tech industry. So it's not just that they're addicted to the technology is an experience, their jobs depend on it. But the good news is that this objection is what creates the opportunity for you to pitch your actionable tip, the thing you defined earlier in your goals. Maybe you want to get your husband to stop carrying his phone in his pocket. So when an objection comes up in your discussion like this, you can pivot to emphasize that he doesn't have to give up his phone. All you're asking for is for him to use it a little more safely and in a way that doesn't actually sacrifice his benefit and enjoyment of the technology. And that's why you need to come to your discussion ready to share some actionable tips, as I mentioned earlier. So before wrapping up, I wanted to cover a little bit about 5G. Obviously, 5G is another form of EMF. So everything I've discussed in this webinar and written about in the ebook you received, all that stuff still applies to 5G. At the same time, 5G is a whole new technology, and it's a controversial one getting a lot of attention. So it can be useful to learn a few pointers about how to discuss 5G specifically and how to frame the issues in a way that's conducive to the discussions you're going to have. So first, and you don't need to explain this to people, but just to make sure you understand, 5G is called 5G because it's the 5th generation of cell networks. So we started with 1G in 1979. Most recently, and still most of us have 4G, which started in 2008. 5G is now the 5th generation. And to best understand what 5G is, I think it's helpful to look at how 5G is different than prior technologies. And the way I explain it, I like to define two key differences between 5G and prior technologies like 4G. The first is frequency. 5G will still use some of the 4G frequencies, but it can also go much higher, up to 300 gigahertz. These are called millimeter waves. And what's key here is that these frequencies that form the 5G band, most of them have never before been used in consumer applications. So 5G will expose people to entirely new forms of EMF. That is the first difference. Second key difference is that with 5G, we're talking about an explosion in the number of sources. A lot of people think of 5G as being for cell phones, and that's true. There are 5G cell phones, but 5G is much more than just cell phones. 5G was designed from the ground up to power the Internet of Things. That includes things like smart cars, smart homes, and smart meters. So with 5G, we're talking about a multiple order of magnitude explosion in the number of sources of EMF in our environment. So those are the two key differences between 5G and all other forms of wireless tech that have come before it. People will be exposed to entirely new forms of EMF, and these exposures will come from an exploding number of sources. We're talking about a multiple order of magnitude growth in the number of sources, which means a huge jump in the number of exposures to this radiation. So those are two key differences. There is one area where 5G is very similar to prior versions of wireless tech, and I think it's also useful to point this out to people. The one key area where 5G is similar to earlier forms of wireless tech is that it's being released with absolutely no testing into the long-term health effects. And I say this is similar to earlier forms of tech because this is exactly how the wireless industry rolls out technology. There was no testing on the long-term, there was no testing into the long-term health effects of the first cell phones before the first cell phones were released. There was no testing into the long-term health effects of Wi-Fi before Wi-Fi was released. There was no testing into the long-term health effects of cordless phones before cordless phones were released. Wireless technology is always released without testing, and 5G is no different. The testing comes later, sometimes years. sometimes decades in the case of diseases like cancers, which do take decades to form. So when when you really need to boil 5G down to a few key points, I like to focus on the two differences, which is the frequencies that we've never been exposed to before, and the explosion in the number of sources, because it's not just cell phones, but also reminding people that there has been no testing into the long-term health effects. So as we approach the end of the educational portion of this webinar, I want to share some encouragement. I know that when you're concerned about EMF, I can understand just how overwhelming it can sometimes feel. After all, they keep making more and more wireless devices, not just new phones, but smart cars and smart meters and smart watches and smart thermostats and smart kitty litter boxes and smart hairbrushes. And so many cell towers are going up every day. And every time you turn on your Wi-Fi on your computer, you see more and more networks, especially if you live in a city. But it's also important to remember that you are not helpless. It is true that you alone cannot stop Apple from selling iPhones, or force Samsung to make safer phones, or prevent Verizon from putting up a tower. But you alone can make a big difference in your personal exposure based on how you engage with technology. And you, on your own, can help make other people in your lives safer by educating them on these important issues. And that in turn will contribute to the larger goals of slowing, for example, the 5G rollout. Because the more people who think twice about upgrading their device, or who think twice about getting a new smartwatch, or who think twice about buying Apple's new wearable glasses, which will probably come out next year. The more people who think twice about buying a new form of wireless tech, the slower that stuff will roll out. And the more people who tell realtors that they are concerned about EMF levels in their homes, the more the market will learn that this is a priority. And the more motivated people will be to make their homes safer and oppose, for example, tower deployments in their neighborhoods. Even if they personally aren't concerned about EMF, everyone is concerned about their home value. The more people who are aware, the more people who start to take back control from EMF and the wireless companies. And the way to start that process is to learn how to communicate these issues and concerns calmly and effectively. That's how it all starts. And please remember to download the ebook that was emailed to you, and it will be emailed to you again when the recording of this webinar is complete. This webinar really only touched on some of the items from a top level. This guide has a lot more information, and it also includes a workbook to help you along your path. And also, you don't need to worry about having missed items or take notes from today's webinar, because it's all in there written for your reference in the long at any point in time. So download it and save it. I think, and I also definitely want to hear your feedback. I want to hear your thoughts about this guide, and I want to hear how it helped. If you tried it, what was your experience like? Did it help you? Did you accomplish goals? Did you encounter opposition I didn't prepare you for in the guide? I want to know what your experience is with this process, because this is a set of materials I am devoted and focused on building out over the coming months. And I'm going to get into Q&A, but before I do, I always have a special offer for people who attend my webinars live, who take the time to do that. And this isn't a sales webinar. This is really an educational webinar. So I'm not going to get into a long sales pitch here. But as I said, I do like giving something to everyone who attends my webinars. And so today I'm excited to share a brand new offer with you, because it ties in to the larger theme I started with. As I said at the beginning, I started SYB to help people live more safely with technology. And I do this with education and products. And in the 8 years I've been running SYB, I focused on electronics accessories and apparel, like you see here, my phone pouch and my boxer briefs. And I am very proud of the catalog that I've built over the years, especially since we're a small business and I started it from scratch. But there's a big limitation, not just of my products, but of most EMF protection products in general. See, the electronics accessories are designed to provide protection from a single specific source of EMF, like how my phone pouch makes it safer to carry your phone, or how my laptop pad makes it safer to use your laptop. And my apparel products are designed to protect a single part of your body, like how the boxers protect men's reproductive organs, or how the bandana can be used to protect your head or your neck, depending on how you use it. So to date, all of my products protect you either from a single source of EMF or they protect a single specific part of your body. And that is until now. Because as I said earlier, I'm focused on finding new ways for SYB to start helping people take control over sources of EMF that are not in their immediate and direct control. Sources like the growing number of cell towers and antennas, including 5G, that are being rolled out around the world. You can't just turn them off, and you can't move them further away because they're not in your direct control. But that doesn't mean you're helpless. Part of how I'm shifting SYB is to provide education on new topics like this webinar and the ebook and the videos that go along with it. Learning how to talk to others about these issues is how you start to build support to eventually implement regulatory change. But as you engage in that process, how do you start protecting yourself right now? And that's why I'm proud to announce the new SYB bed canopy, which offers protection from all sources of EMF radiation for your entire body. And it offers this protection all night long, which is significant not only because it's a third of your life, but it's a really important part of each day. When your body rests, it recovers from the prior day and helps regenerate for the next day. My SYB bed canopy is tested to shield up to 99.98% of EMF, including 5G frequencies up to 26 gigahertz. The test data is on the website. It's made from 100% silver thread. It includes floor mats, which you can use or not use. That's optional, but it is included. And if you use it, it provides protection in every direction. We're talking about omnidirectional protection in bed. It has openings on both sides for easy entrance and exit. It includes a mounting kit for easy installation. You don't need a big, heavy frame. You can just mount it into your ceiling. And it's machine washable. This first version is available in the king size, but depending on how people feel about it, I may add more sizes in the future. And it's available for pre-order right now for delivery by the end of August. And if you pre-order right now, you can save 35%. So you just need to enter this coupon code that you see here, Canopy35 at checkout. This coupon code will expire at midnight tonight. That's in about 10 hours, midnight tonight Pacific time, and you can save $661.50 on your order. And like all my products, it includes free shipping, a lifetime warranty, and 30-day returns. Now, I know at this price, this product is not for everyone. And if you know me and you know my catalog, you know I work hard to make my products as affordable as possible. Most are under $40, and all of them until now have been under $100. But please remember that EMF shielding materials are not inexpensive. This SYB bed canopy is made with 100% silver thread. And of course, it uses a lot of it. It's literally a precious metal. So I didn't take this step lightly to add a product like this to my catalog. It was a big decision for me, but I wanted a product that could provide effective protection for such a big and important part of your life. To start offering protection against sources of EMF that are not in your immediate control. So in addition to the education, products like this are a key way to help people like you start taking back control over your exposures to EMF from sources that are not in your direct control. So if you are interested, this is a great opportunity to get my new bed canopy for a really good price. So with that, I'm going to thank you all for attending. and I'm going to get into some Q&A. I see there's a good number of questions posted here, but I'm going to start with some from the form that a lot of you filled out. There was a really good response here. I'm not going to get to everything. If I don't get to your question, you can just email me. You can reply to the emails you got about the webinar. People think I'm alarmist and making a bigger deal out of things because if it were true or were really harmful, it would not be allowed. And when I give suggestions for precautions, people attack me either for being too soft and not speaking out against 5G, or too crazy that I believe it's harmful. Okay, two things there. Both are definitely worth addressing. So if it were true that it was harmful, it would not be allowed. You know, I touched on that in the slides today. And in the ebook, you'll see I give 3 specific examples of, because you know what, let me open it up I think I can open it up real quick. But one is there were three categories of examples of how that just isn't true. And sorry, I'm just opening up the ebook. I should have had it open before. My computer is doing a lot. So the first is the science doesn't know it's harmful. One example where a harmful product was allowed to be sold, where we didn't know the science, was thalidomide, which was a morning sickness pill treatment that was available in the 1960s. And that was made available to pregnant women, and they didn't know when they approved it, but it caused significant birth defects and was eventually pulled from the market. So that's one example. In some cases, it's because the regulations lag behind the science. So we know science has demonstrated the negative effects of something, but the regulations haven't yet caught up. And one great example for that is tobacco. This was the case in the 1980s and 1990s, when everyone knew that smoking was dangerous, but it was still largely unregulated and you could still do it everywhere. And in other cases, it's because the regulations aren't actually enforced. This is also the case with cell phones. And I have information about that in multiple videos and in blog posts about regulations. But one example I point people to is Dieselgate, where Volkswagen was allowed to sell a tremendous number of cars based off of fraudulent test data. They just lied. They lied about what their cars did. And the same is true for cell phones. And I use the example of PhoneGate. So again, these are all available in the ebook. I'd strongly encourage you to get it, to look through it. So when people say if it's true that it's harmful, it wouldn't be allowed, that's not true. Now, you have to decide how you're going to respond to them, because you have to keep the conversation civil, but you can show them specific examples about how what they're saying just isn't true. Now, when you talk about giving suggestions for precautions, some people attack you for being too soft and some for not speaking out against 5G enough, or some saying you're being too aggressive. Look, I understand. I am in the same position with SYB. I have people who say that I'm trying to make people scared about a threat that isn't real just in order to sell things. I have other people who say I am not being strong enough in my attacks on 5G. It comes from every angle, and that's one of the characteristics of this debate right now. Not only this debate, political tensions overall are very divided right now and very tense, and learning how to address, but that doesn't mean I just close up shop and go away. It means I learn new tactics and new approaches so that I can address, both sides as much as possible. If people don't want to hear what I have to say, they're not going to listen. But I try to make the messages and the arguments as compelling to people as possible. But what you're pointing out is it's definitely true. Let's see, I'm going to try to get to some of the shorter questions here. In addition to this, can you research what products that can be taken internally to strengthen one's immunity towards EMF and 5G? That's a really good question. It is an area that I would like, well, it's an area that I understand is important. for now, one person I would recommend is Lloyd Burrell. He runs electricsense.com. And obviously, I don't agree with every single thing he posts, but he has a lot of information about responses to boost your immune system. Another one is Dr. Mercola. And I believe it's Mercola.com. But if you just Google Dr. Mercola, you'll find him. And he has a lot of that information as well. I'm over 65, and therefore the info I'm sharing is with others my own age. They don't seem to be as concerned about EMF as I am. What can I say to get their attention? That's a difficult one because well, let me say it this way: the younger you are, the more at risk you are, because well, the younger you are, the more vulnerable you are to this type of damage. And I have a blog post that explains that. So if you want to email in, I'm happy to send it to you. Because, for instance, your cells are dividing more rapidly. You're still growing. And so any damage to a cell the impact is multiplied in your body. But also because you have longer to live with any of that damage. So the younger you are, the more at risk you are. That means necessarily the older you are, the less at risk you are. So, one way you can try to get their attention is seeing if they have children or grandchildren, because if they do, that would be how I would try to approach it. Because most people who are grandparents are very concerned about the health of their children and grandchildren. So that's the angle that I would use. My 15-year-old son thinks I'm overreacting by having concerns. He's with me on not using earbuds or putting the phone to his ear, small things like that, but doesn't see the big picture. He wants proof of harm, but will not read anything I share with him. I'm here in hopes that I can find a way to help him understand. That's okay. So first, I'm going to congratulate you because you've gotten someone to start making those small changes, not using his wireless earbuds or putting his phone to his ear. Don't you say there's small things like that? Don't discount that. That's a big win. You've made a direct impact on his health, and maybe without realizing it, you've opened him up to new messaging. So that is a significant win that you should be proud of. Now, in terms of proof, I tried to address. There is a lot of evidence of harm, and I have a lot of this information on the blog. And that is, I'm trying to work on for next month making content that's more shareable, that summarizes some of the more concerning evidence. Now, whether it's definitive proof or not, that's something I tried to touch on in the presentation. But there is a lot of evidence. And again, I think, if you go to shieldyourbody.com/learn, that is a really good place to start. It's obviously, there's thousands of studies out there. I can only write about so many, but I think, I've tried to pick some of the more compelling ones and some of the more compelling arguments to present that information. So that's a really good place to start, but know that I'm working on more information. How can we protect ourselves from our neighbors' Wi-Fi? We see as many as 8 to 10 networks, some still strong in our house. Is there any practical thing one can do? So that's a perfect example of a use case for why I've developed the bed canopy. So that's really the only product in my that's why I added it to my catalog, and we're just starting pre-orders now. It'll be shipping in August. That's the way I'm approaching. You can't stop it fully, but you can stop it while you sleep, which is a huge part of your day. It's certainly a huge part of the time you spend at home, and it's a really important part of the day. Beyond that, there are whole home shielding solutions. It's not a product you can buy. It's more of an implementation that has to be designed for your house. And if that's something you're interested in, know that A, it's expensive, and B, it's difficult. So for people who are interested in that, I always recommend a consultant, that they engage a consultant. If that's something you want, you can email in and I can send you a referral. But don't do I strongly recommend doing whole home or even whole room shielding yourself without the assistance of a consultant, because it's very easy to get wrong. And if you do it wrong, you can end up amplifying your exposures. How do I tell people the truth about 5G without scaring them to death or making them think I'm crazy? I think the way I talk about 5G is an effective way. Now, maybe you don't agree, and I know you wrote this question before you saw my presentation, but I think that the way that I try to approach it, which is talking about those two key differences and then the one similarity, that I find, I mean, I don't feel like the way I'm talking about it is alarmist. I'm talking about a serious issue, and I'm pointing out key facts about it that are undeniable. And I certainly I don't get into topics like how 5G caused coronavirus, which I don't actually even believe, but you don't want to get into these things and that's why I was saying lead with the science, lead with facts, because when you rely on things that are facts, you can present them more calmly and in a way that if people are interested, they can engage with your subject matter. They're more willing to engage. They can engage more deeply. You can have a more meaningful conversation. Okay, so there are more questions here, but I'm going to jump back and forth now. So I'm going to go into the room and see what questions we have here. Let me see. Anand asks, how is the awareness of EMF and 5G truly changing the way we are living, or are we just ignoring it like the warning signs of cigarettes? How can we bring real transformation with this evangelism? Great question, Anand. So I do think it's already changing. And I started the webinar by talking about that because the type of stuff we're seeing with 5G, we just haven't seen before. You haven't seen cities block cell phone technology, whole cities, the capital of a country, blocking a new cell phone technology because of the uncertainty around the health effects. That kind of stuff didn't happen before. So there is already a change. So how can we bring real transformation? Well, I mean, so not only is there change, that change has happened because there's more opposition. And so opposition is growing, which means more people are aware and they're aware enough to take action. So the way that I feel I can contribute to this process is by helping people learn how to communicate this to others. This is a process of normalizing the information. I mean, there was a point in time where not only were people not concerned about the health effects of cigarettes, they literally had doctors doing cigarette ads, right? And so to get from that point to the point where you're not allowed to smoke basically anywhere except your house, that was a long process. You literally had doctors doing ads for cigarettes, and now you can barely smoke anywhere. But that took a long time. And in order for that process to happen, you needed to normalize awareness. And that's what I'm trying to help. And that I mean, nothing happens overnight. Nothing like this happens over. You can start using a phone pouch, my SYB phone pouch, and, make that difference overnight. But the type of transformational change you're talking about, that is an ongoing process. And I think learning how to communicate these issues to others, feeling comfortable doing it more, doing it so that it's a matter of course, and something that just happens, that's how we start to build a bigger awareness, which then supports a bigger opposition, which then leads to the type of change you're talking about. Thank you, Anand. Tomoko asks, what is the most effective way to shield EMF coming from 22 smart meters placed in the other side of the wall? They are downstairs. So that's similar to the other question I just answered about multiple Wi-Fi networks in the building. You can consider a product like my bed canopy. You can consider doing, I assume you're in an apartment building, because if there's 22 smart meters, it's probably an apartment building. You can consider trying to implement whole apartment EMF protection with the assistance of a consultant. It is more difficult, but you can try to get the apartment building to move the installations. Now that you can't do overnight, but that is one of those things where that's one of those goals that is not easy to achieve, but is within reason. It's within the realm of possibility. And the way to get to that point is by getting more neighbors on your side. And the way to get to that point is by adopting the tactics like I'm sharing in this webinar. So this webinar doesn't help you get rid of the smart meters, but this content that I'm sharing now is designed to help you get allies on your side. And once you have that, then you can design an approach to make an appeal to, I don't know if it would be your landlord or the building owner or whoever, the management company. So if that's something you're interested in, you can contact me, because that's a program that I'm working on developing now. Thank you. I don't know if this is Davif or David, misspelled, but what are my thoughts about the mega satellites in abundance coming our way? I am very concerned about the mega satellites. You know, Starlink, and Starlink is just one company. Starlink is actually a project of SpaceX, which is Elon Musk's company. They're just one company is planning to send up 50,000 of these satellites, and they're deploying a bunch. I can't remember now, that I have it posted on the blog, but they're deploying a bunch of these relay antennas on the ground in the United States and eventually in other countries around the world. I'm really concerned about it. I'm concerned about it for all of humanity, but I'm also and for nature, but I'm also particularly concerned about it for the electrosensitive. And the electrosensitive, you know, it can be easy to ignore electrosensitivity because it is relatively small percentage of the population that reports these symptoms of being sensitive to EMF in these ways. But I will tell you from personal experience, that percentage is growing. The number of people who are reporting these symptoms is growing. And that's not a surprise, because the level of EMF is growing. So it shouldn't surprise people when, if we compare it to an allergy, if you increase the amount of an allergen in the environment, the more people are it's going to trigger an allergic response. And the reason I'm concerned for the electrosensitive is because being electrosensitive today is tough enough. You have to sacrifice a huge part of your life in a lot of cases just to get to a place. And when I say get to a place, I mean physically locate in a place that has low enough levels of EMF radiation. When you're talking about blanketing the planet in this stuff, you know, those places are going to become harder and harder to find. So yeah, I'm very concerned about the satellites, and that is, you know, that's why it's one example of why I find it so important to start focusing more of my work, whether it's the education or the product development, on protecting against sources that aren't in our immediate control. So I'll also just add, because I don't know if anyone else had to um, uh, if anyone else asked about this, but you know, people talk about 5G as an urban technology, and in a lot of ways it is, because 5G, just because of the nature of the technology, it really is designed to work most effectively in cities where there's a sufficiently dense population to make it economically viable. But there are companies out there working on bringing 5G to rural America, and one of them, I believe it's AT&T. They have a project called AirGig, and they're planning to turn the power grid into a 5G antenna, right? Because the power grid is an antenna. We don't use it as an antenna, but it is an antenna. And you can relay these signals just down a power line, just like you can relay electricity down a power line. So anywhere that there is electrification, which is most of rural America, you are going to have the chance of having 5G there, even if you're not in a city. So the satellites concern me. Air gig concerns me. There are a lot of things going on right now that really concern me, and that's why I'm spending this time in investing in creating this type of content and new products like my canopy. Thank you, David. Susan asks how we can protect ourselves from 5G. You know, in a certain sense, we protect ourselves against 5G the same way we protect ourselves against EMF, right? I didn't explain it explicitly in this webinar, but I do in the ebook, and it's the two key rules, right? Minimize your use of EMF emitting technology and maximize the distance from that technology when it's in use. And the same rules apply. So whether your cell phone is 5G or it's 4G, The way you use it will impact your exposure. Now, in terms of the other aspects of 5G, like the number of sources in our environment and the new frequencies and so forth, that's the shield. Well, let me just say, the same healthy living tips apply. The 2 key rules of EMF protection: minimize use and maximize distance. Those apply to 5G as much as to 4G and other tech. And EMF protection products. That's why I've gone through, I think it's up to 8 now. 8 of my products in my catalog, no, 9 now with the canopy, are 5G tested, because I think it's important to get test results to show that my products work on 5G just like they work on prior versions of EMF. But if you're talking about 5G as a metaphor for the explosion in technology, that's why I'm working on content like what we talked about here in this webinar today. And the way to start making a change in how this technology is deployed and how much of it is deployed and where it's deployed, that starts by learning how to talk about it. Thank you, Susan. Susan also asks how we know when 5G goes live. Stephanie asked. Thank you, Stephanie. So yeah, the Ookla 5G map is a great resource. It's not comprehensive, especially outside of the United States. I've checked. There are some countries where I know there are installations, but they're not yet on that map. But that's a really good place to start. And and Dave also put in antennasearch.com. That's a really good site. I don't know how they're covering 5G, but they have a tremendous database. They've been around a long time. So that's a really great site as well. Thank you, Susan. Laurel asks, I sometimes download at night via cell phone as a mobile hotspot. What's the minimum distance the devices need to be from the sleeping area? So that's a good question. As you know, I always say not to sleep with your phone or to put it in airplane mode if you do. But if you're using it as a for a productive function at that time and turning it off isn't practical, the answer is as far away as possible. But if so you definitely want to keep it as far. If you're in a in a house, maybe leave it in a different part of the house. If you're in a studio apartment, leave it on the other as far away in the apartment from your bed as possible. But if you need a fixed number, I'd say at least 6 feet, but definitely as far as possible. Thank you, Laurel. Claire asked, do I think 5G could be the cause of a lot of deaths in the next few years? Lots of scaremongering on social media. Yeah, I don't use social media anymore. I mean, SYB does, and it's a great way to engage with our customers and to share some content. But beyond that, social media has become very unpleasant, especially around issues of 5G and with the pandemic. I try not to be a scaremonger because I don't think that helps, first of all. Second, a lot of it is based on false information or assumptions that may or may not be true. So, do I think it can be, I think 5G will be the source of a lot of disease, and some of that disease will lead to increased mortality in the way that we've seen already with prior generations of this technology, but I think more so because of the explosion in the number of sources. And that's what I often don't hear. That's why I focus on it so much. I often don't hear it when people are talking about 5G and their concerns about 5G and why everyone should be afraid of 5G. I often don't hear them express the simple fact that you're talking about an explosion in the number of sources. So even if 5G is no more dangerous than 4G or 3G or Wi-Fi, you're still talking about an explosion in the number of exposures, that you're going to be exposed to so much more EMF. Even if the EMF is no more dangerous than today's frequencies, it's a tremendous leap in how much we're all going to be exposed to because of how many different devices are going to be connecting to these networks. So that's my big concern with 5G. And it should just be tested. There's enough data out there now that shows real health risks from prior versions of this technology. We've gotten to the point where there's enough information that justifies putting this stuff through regulatory testing, the same way we do with, for instance, drugs. The vaccines that everyone needs in order for the world to rebound from COVID, those have to go through more testing than 5G phones. And those are potentially life-saving treatments that not only will save lives, but help the world economy get back to normal. And we have to put those through multiple rounds of clinical trials. Why don't we apply the same standard to 5G? It's just reasonable to me. But the goal here is to make more people realize that that's reasonable. Sorry, I think I got a little worked up there, but thank you, Claire. Laurel asks if the bed canopy repels mosquitoes. It's funny. My brother asked me the same question. It hasn't been tested for that, but maybe we'll put that through testing. I don't know. Sorry, I don't have a better answer for you on that. Thank you, Laurel. David asks, what is the mat under the bed, and do you ground your canopy? Okay, two good questions. So the mat is, you can see it in the picture. It's the blue part of the picture. It's actually two mats that come with it, and you can lay it under your bed. Some people don't want to. If they live in a house and they're on the ground floor, there's no real reason to use the mat. But if you're in an apartment building especially, the mat, I think, is important because it'll block the EMF from coming from underneath you. And it's made of a different material than the rest of the canopy, but it has very effective shielding. And so it's made from a steel. You know what? I should have remembered this. I apologize. I don't have. Let me just pull this up, and I'll give you that answer. It's posted right there on the product page, but let me pull that up. And the mat is made from 30% stainless steel, 30% polyester, 40% cotton. So the mat, the shielding element is stainless steel in the mat, whereas the rest of the canopy is made from silver, 100% silver thread. Okay, so you had a second part of your question that I did want to answer. Do you ground your canopy? The answer there is you can. It is not required. The reason I didn't, so if you want to ground it, you can buy, and if you email us, I'll send you a direct link. It's from another store that we recommend. We have we don't get a commission or anything, but we just recommend it. And you can get an alligator clip ground. So you can just clip it to the canopy and then plug it into the wall, and you can ground your canopy that way if you choose to. I didn't put a grounding snap on it because, and I actually went through this thought process as we were designing the product. I didn't want people to think they had to ground it in order for it to work, because it still works as a shield regardless. And two is because I've seen growing amount of concern that when if you ground things into the ground, that's one thing. But most people who live, particularly in apartment buildings or even in homes, they're not grounding into the ground. They're not grounding into the earth itself. They're grounding into the circular part of the ground of your outlet. So they're effectively grounding into the power grid. And when you ground into the power grid, signals can go both ways, and it can become a conduit for dirty electricity. So that's why we don't currently sell any grounding products, because I want more data on that concern. But for people who do want to ground it, they can use this product like I just told you about. It's an alligator clip ground. So if you email in, it's $10. Thank you, David. Bonnie, what about a canopy for baby cribs when parents won't turn off Wi-Fi? Great suggestion. That is actually one of the sizes we're considering. So, this is a new product. It's obviously at a different price point for us. I think it's a great product, but we have to see how well consumers respond to it. And if it goes well, we're definitely doing other sizes. And baby crib is definitely one of the sizes on our radar. Thank you, Bonnie. Herschel says, great idea, but sadly out of his financial reach. Totally understood. I'll work over to, if I can afford to make more of these, then I can try to bring the price down. Right now, we're talking about very low volume product. So, but if we can generate more and more sales, at some point I'll be able to bring the price down. But you also asked, do I ship to the UK? Yes. Every order from my website has free shipping throughout North America. That's the US, Canada, and Mexico, throughout the European Union, which for right now still includes the UK, and to Australia as well. And we're looking to add more and more countries to our shipping. Thank you, Herschel. Laurel asks if she can get a 35% discount on other products today, please. I'm going to ask Stephanie, can you please create a coupon for Laurel and post it as a comment for her? Or if that doesn't happen before we end the webinar, Laurel, just email in and we'll get you that code because you asked so nicely. You said, please. How can I say no? Thank you, Laurel. Debbie asks, can you speak of the difference between ionizing and non-ionizing radiation, and also pulsating radiation, how it affects your health? That's a really good question. So I don't know if you saw, I just posted a video. Stephanie, if you could post in there the link to the video I sent out this week on YouTube. So in there's a very quick explanation. So ionizing and non-ionizing radiation are two forms of EMF. So, and it's based off of how much energy the radiation has. So ionizing radiation, so I'm on camera, right? So you can see, think of, there's an EMF spectrum, and I have graphics of this on the website, but for now I'm just going to use my hand. There's an EMF spectrum, and right in the middle of that spectrum is sunlight. And sunlight is a form of EMF. And if a form of EMF has more energy than sunlight, we call that ionizing. And that includes things like X-rays and gamma rays. And it's called ionizing because it has so much energy, it can knock electrons loose from the atoms in your body. That ionizes the atoms. So it starts breaking down the atoms that form your body. That's why it's so dangerous, even in incredibly small doses. And that's why you should always, when dentists try to give me X-rays, I push back, unless it's, unless I have a real problem, or unless it's, maybe been 2 years. The dentist tries to give me X-rays every 6 months. I say, no, I don't need them every 6 months. And that's why they put on this lead jacket on the rest of your body when they give you those X-rays, because you notice that the X-ray technician moves into another room while they're doing it, because that's how dangerous it is. So ionizing radiation like X-rays and gamma rays, everyone knows that stuff is really, really, really dangerous, even in the short term, even at very low doses. So forms of EMF with less energy than the sun, that's called non-ionizing, because it doesn't have enough energy to ionize the atoms in your body. So, and that includes all the forms of radiation that I'm talking about. So that's radio frequency and microwave and ELF, or extremely low frequency, that comes from power lines. Those are all forms of non-ionizing radiation, and they do not have as much energy, and so they don't ionize the atoms in your body. So it was long thought, because they didn't ionize the atoms in your body, it was long thought that they were safe. But over the past several decades, a growing body of science shows that assumption was wrong. Now, in terms of pulsating radiation and how it affects your health, I know that there are some studies on this. It's a confusing area because this is hard to, in terms of expressing the health effects of EMF exposure, you're talking about measuring populations in the what is does a cell phone lead to increased risk of cancer? Does a cell phone lead to increased risk of miscarriage? You're measuring health effects in the population, and you're not really controlling for how much of the radiation they're exposed to was pulsed or not pulsed, or at what frequency it was pulsed. And it's very hard to back out the impact of pulsed radiation in terms of health effects. That said, I believe there is enough data to show that the fact that radiation is pulsed and the regularity or lack of regularity of the pulses in the signals is a contributing factor to health effects. But I don't know enough, and I don't know if anyone knows enough about really what impacts those have yet. Thank you, Debbie. I apologize I got a little stumbled on that answer, but thank you. Susan asks if you have to ground the mesh over the bed. No, you do not have to. You can if you want to, but thank you very much, Susan. Laurel asked, last week I noticed I was having headaches at night and the next day after using a wired headset. This week I stopped using the headset and the headaches did not come. Direct correlation. You know, this is what one of the things I'm talking about. If when you use something you feel bad and when you stop using it you feel better, that's good evidence that the thing you were using is the cause or a contributing cause of the negative health effect that you were experiencing. So you can't say that it's a direct correlation scientifically, but on a personal level, in terms of making these personal decisions, I think, yeah, that's clearly evidence that you should stop using that product in that way. Thank you, Laurel. Catherine asks if I can refer you to any particular building biologists or EMF consultants. Yes, I can. So if you just email in, we'll be happy to do that for you. Thank you, Catherine. Bonnie says she can opt out of smart meters everywhere she's lived, but you have to pay extra for the manual reading. Yes, that's true in some areas, and unfortunately not true in others. But if you're in an area that has a smart meter, it's definitely worth finding out if you have the option to opt out. And if so, I strongly recommend doing it. I know it does cost extra. I believe in most places, though, it's something like $10 a month. I mean, we're not talking about a mass. I mean, I know it's not nothing, but it's not a massive extra expense. And it's, in my opinion, it's worth it. Thank you, Bonnie. I apologize. I do not know how to pronounce this name. Tahuana asked, how do you turn 5G off from a cell phone? Well, first off, don't buy, if that's what you want to do, don't buy a 5G phone. Right now, still today, you have to really go out of your way to get a 5G phone. Almost all phones don't have 5G these days. iPhone, no Apple phone, for instance, is available with 5G. And all the 5G phones that I've seen so far cost a lot of money, like over $1,000. So you just want to check on your phone. Does it say your signal is 5G or not? And please note, AT&T uses this thing called 5GE. So if your phone says 5GE, you're not on 5G. You're on what AT&T is marketing as an interim step to 5G. So anyway, the point there is you probably, unless you went out of your way to buy a 5G phone, you don't have 5G on your cell phone. In terms of turning 5G off on the phone, I don't know the answer to that one. There may be a way, but I haven't actually used a 5G phone yet myself. But if so, there's probably a setting that you can I shouldn't say probably, there may be a setting to downgrade your connection. But I'd have to see, and it would depend on your phone model and your phone carrier. But short answer is you probably don't have 5G on your phone right now unless you went out of your way to buy a 5G phone. Thank you. Sorry, give me 1 second. I'm starting to lose my voice. Okay, better. Martha asks, can 5G be turned off at night at the router? I'm sorry, can Wi-Fi be turned off at night at the router? Yes. And Stephanie did, no, you didn't. Hold on. Let me just bring you to this. I'm copying a link to paste here into the room. How do I post a comment? So I'm giving you a link right here. This is my post on turning off your Wi-Fi router at night. And that has a bunch of suggestions that you could unplug it. You can put it on a timer. You can, with some places you can use software that you can even control from your phone. So you can use your phone to turn off your router and then turn your phone into airplane mode. There's a bunch of different options. So that post is where I would recommend you visit. Thank you, Martha. Let's see. So let me jump back. Oh, just quickly, before Mira asked, can I get 35% off coupon for your other products? Yes, please email into hello at, and because you asked nicely, again with the please, that was good. You guys are learning. We'll make it, yeah, we'll give you a one-time, it'll be time limited because 35% is a pretty big discount, and I really only do that occasionally, and that was for today's webinar, so it'll be time limited, single use, but yes, if you email in to hello at Shield Your Body, we'll get that taken care of for you. Thank you, Mira. Laurel asked, what is EHS? EHS stands for electro-hypersensitivity. And here I'm finding a link to give you. Post a comment. So that is my post on electromagnetic hypersensitivity. It's a condition. Again, it's convenient to think of it as an allergy, but the effects can be really debilitating for people who experience it. So most of us don't realize when we're exposed to EMF. We don't feel it instantly in immediately discernible ways. People with EHS do, and it can vary. I explained the symptoms on that post. The symptoms can vary, from things like rashes to anxiety to real more serious medical problems. So that anyway, I'd recommend you view that post. Oh, someone is on the webinar is a building biologist who knows great building biologists from all over the country. She posted her email address here. So if anyone, I know a couple of people had asked about that. So you might want to look at her email address. And then I assume from your email address that your name is Kathy. So I'm going to ask Stephanie, can you please note her email address so we can get in touch with her, please? And Kathy, if you'd like, you can email me directly. I'd like to the chance to talk with you. Thank you. Okay. Oh, Tijuana says Apple iPhone 11. You don't. I'm sorry, you don't have 5G. If you have an iPhone 11, you don't have 5G, so you don't need to worry about disabling it on your phone. Thank you. So I'm going to jump back to, oh, my keyboard is dead. Hold on. Where did those go? Okay, some of the other questions here. Okay, the combination of satellites above towers and repeaters on ground level is intimidating. I agree. I'm curious about whether and these are from the questions that people submitted before the webinar. I'm curious about whether these satellites can ever be turned off. I mean, that would require legislation. Or a failed business. I mean, if Starlink doesn't get any customers, then it's not a viable business, and it'll stop. They won't keep paying to run that network if it doesn't have any customers or doesn't have enough customers. Whether that happens or not, that's a big question. But the more the other option is regulation, getting laws to actually change what's allowed in the sky, and that's a longer process. I'm also wondering about how to analyze the growing marketplace of devices that claim to help regulate and stabilize our cells at the level of fluidity and balance. How do we help buffer ourselves from the above and below sources of EMF microwave radiation? Yeah, that's a really good question because people ask me about these technologies all the time. I get emails about harmonizers and neutralizers and immune system supplements, and I know some people who say that certain things work. I know some people who say those same things don't work. And it's hard for me to comment on them for that reason. I focus SYB, and this is in part the legacy of my father, which is how how I started the company, the direction I started the company, is basing things off of science. That means things that science can show. So that means in the case of shielding products, it means products that I can show in a lab work the way that I say. In the case of education, there's science to back up what I'm saying. Now, I want to be clear. Science doesn't answer every question. Science isn't omniscient. Science is a specific way that we have of measuring and understanding and interacting with the world around us. Just because science doesn't prove something is real doesn't mean it's not real. Just because science can't prove that something works doesn't mean it doesn't work. But in terms of the way that I run SYB and how I choose to focus my advocacy and education efforts, I always look to the science, because I try very hard to provide information to people that I can back up with science, because that's what gives me the comfort and the strength to spread the messages that I'm spreading. So that's in terms of these other types of products. It is a little bit sort of a wild west out there, and you really have to go based off of your gut. So, for instance, Dr. Mercola, he's a great resource, and he has a lot of information on immune system supplements and things like that go along to help repair the damage from EMF. If he recommends something, I give it credence. Just because he is such a good authority on these things. Even if I can't prove it myself. If he's saying, based off of his understanding of medicine and the human body, that this type of supplement should work for a certain end result, it's not maybe scientifically provable, but I certainly give it more credence because of who is sharing that information. So I hope that was some type of useful answer for you. I'm trying to scroll through here. When you tell people 5G is not safe due to health risks, they don't believe you. You get dismissed for being over the top or a conspiracy theorist. They dismiss you on the basis that it must be safe or it wouldn't be promoted and allowed. Yeah, I mean, I understand. I feel like the calmer you are in your presentation, so the more that you rely on facts and the calmer you are in your presentation, the more receptive people are to this information. Doesn't mean that everyone's receptive, and you can't convince everybody. If they're not open to it, they're not open to it. You're not going to be able to force them to believe something. But if you rely on the facts, like the way I presented 5G in the webinar, just those three statements, right? Exposures to new radiation, an explosion in the number of sources, and no testing. That is, those aren't even the most extreme or most concerning facts I could say about 5G that are provable by science. They're just real basic, non-controversial facts, but they're enough to get a lot of people saying, oh, really? And then when you say they dismiss you on the basis that it must be safe, that's just not true. And there's example after example after example of that. And if you get the practice of answering, you'll get better at it, and you'll see you'll be able to change more people's minds. That's at least my experience, and that's what I'm building these materials for. Is to try to help people get to the same point that I'm at. Because SYB wouldn't exist if I didn't know how to communicate things, to communicate these issues to people in a way that they were open to. And so I'm trying now to share that information gained from that experience. And I totally understand what you're saying in terms of how people react to you. And what I'm telling you is, well, A, there are some people you won't convince, but B, there are ways to convince some of the people. And I'm giving you insight into the ways that I found to be most effective. I've heard that 5G will allow use of all millimeter wave frequencies, not just a few. Whether the telcos have the license to use all frequencies. Okay, so that's a really good question. So this question is about what frequencies does 5G use? So the 5G band does go up to 300 gigahertz, which is, it's really high. And that is in the millimeter wave range. To my knowledge, currently, No one has a license to go anywhere near that, right? So there's a difference between what 5G will one day be and what it is today. So with the initial rollout of 5G, all of the deployments are supposed to be under 6 gigahertz. And I saw during the pandemic, they were starting to allocate spectrum up to 8 gigahertz. But so almost all the deployment, it may still be that all the deployments are at 6 gigahertz. Almost all, and if that's not true, the other ones are only going up to 8 gigahertz. And it's also my understanding that in the next couple of years, they're talking about going up to 26 gigahertz with some consumer applications. That is a big jump from where we are now, but it's also not yet at 300 gigahertz. I mean, you can tell, right, 26 to 300, that's a big difference. Now, the other part of your question, how do we find out which portions of the spectrum are in use? Is that publicly available? That is a tricky one. Some of it should be publicly available, but I don't believe it. So I do believe that in terms of widespread consumer deployment right now, everything is at 6 gigahertz or under, with a couple now going up to 8. And but moving forward, you know, because right now you can get so little information about what your smart meter is doing. Your electric utility company does not need to tell you how often your smart meter transmits, or with what power level, what the SAR rating of it might be, if it was even tested. There are so many different, there's not like one standard of smart meter, there's a whole bunch of different standards. And your utility company does not have to tell you that. So I doubt that they're suddenly gonna have to tell you which portion of the 5G spectrum they're using. So I am confident in terms of my understanding of where things are now. I think that the longer this goes on, we're going to have access to less and less and less of this information, unless new legislation is passed that mandates transparency and disclosure. That was a really good question. Thank you. Could you please give concrete answers to the question of what to do to protect us from EMF and 5G so that a lay person understands it and learns what to do? For the longer answer, and when I say longer, not really long, but for the longer answer, definitely check the ebook that I sent you, because that has it. I always summarize it as the 2 key rules. Minimize use and maximize distance. Those are the 2 key rules to protect yourself from any form of EMF. Minimize use means using EMF emitting tech less. That doesn't mean abandoning technology. It means things like turning your phone into airplane mode when you're not using your phone, turning off your Wi-Fi router at night when you're going to bed, using less EMF tech less often. Maximizing distance, the second rule. That means keeping your phone, not carrying your phone in your pocket, but keeping it further away from your body, or making sure it's in airplane mode if you do put it in your pocket. It means keeping your Wi-Fi router, if you use Wi-Fi, as far away from you in your apartment or home as possible, because increasing distance makes a big difference in your exposure. So it's I boil it down to 2 rules: minimize use and maximize distance. And then there are a lot of different ways to implement those rules, and I link to a bunch of them from the ebook, and I have a lot more on the website. And I'm working on creating more shareable versions of all that information. Do you have suggestions on how to encourage the powers that be to ban 5G from neighborhoods? I don't have those suggestions today, but that is what I am working towards helping with. So just stay tuned. So I will say that the first step in any effort like that, is getting allies. So if you want to ban 5G from your neighborhood, if you want to get Wi-Fi removed from your child's school, if you want to move a cell tower, whether it's 5G or not, you're going to need allies. And what the information we're covering today and in the materials that you got in the ebook, that's all the first step towards the longer term goal of making these bigger changes in your community. So that's why I'm focusing on this first. Will a 5G rollout by the local utilities adversely impact my home and life? That's a difficult question to answer. I mean, it depends on, well, look, you're talking about more EMF deployments, right? So in general, you want to try to minimize those. because the more EMF you're exposed to, the more risks you face to your personal health. That doesn't mean that if they put out a 5G antenna, you'll immediately feel it or it'll make a big impact on your life. But 5G is just, I understand why 5G, it has this name 5G. It got really scary. I understand why 5G is considered to be like its own subject, but really it's all forms of EMF. And the more EMF we have in our environment, the greater our health risks. And so that's why I think it's important that people try to be exposed to less EMF in the ways that they can. That's how I would answer that question. Is there a site that clearly lists the actual health risks associated with EMF and 5G, with some of the actual health studies included? Well, okay, so with 5G, there's almost no testing. So that was something I hinted at, or didn't hint at. That's something I said in the webinar. There are a couple, I have a post on 5G health risks. So if you go to if you go to shieldyourbody.com, you go to the Learn menu, and you click on the 5G link, there's a post there on 5G health risks. And it does cover a couple of studies that apply to 5G frequencies, and also gives you a way of trying to understand the health risks. In terms of overall health risks of EMF, there are a lot of sites that list those health risks. And I have several posts about that. The Bioinitiative report also is a good site, and there are other sites as well. There are a lot of different health risks associated with EMF. And it's one of the points I try to hit home is because, and I do this actually in the cell phone health risk post, EMF, there's a couple of things, two key things to understand about EMF. EMF affects DNA. And DNA is obviously it's shared in all of the cell. Every cell in your body has DNA. So if EMF harms DNA and DNA is in every cell in your body, you're talking about a force that can manifest in a lot of different forms of disease. And that's, I think, why you see so many different negative health, so many widely varied health effects manifesting from exposure to EMF radiation, because the mechanism of DNA damage can result in so many different health effects. I'm just looking here. Where is the science and why is it not readily available? The science is out there. And again, I would point you to the site. Not that my website is a completely comprehensive catalog, but it's a great starting point. I have a lot of content on my site. So if you go to shieldyourbody.com/learn, there's a lot, I cover a lot of the science there. Also, the book I wrote with my father, Overpowered, that's available on Amazon. And that whole book, my father was obviously, he was a scientist. So almost the whole book is about the science. There are some other parts that are about the business side of things and how to, how that impacts the science. But and a lot of that's also on the blog. And then once you go through that, you can learn how to search for some other stuff. The Bioinitiative report, which my father was an author of, but he was one of the authors of that. That's another great resource. There are a ton of these resources out there. So it's just a matter of knowing where to look. Okay, I'm going to jump back to the room. I got through almost all the questions that were asked ahead of time. So I am trying to get back. Yeah, okay. Let's see, are there any other? Anand asked how to bring SYB products to India. Anand, you can email me. Just reply to any of the emails you got about the webinar. I'll get that, and I'll be happy to learn more about what you're thinking. Thank you. Okay, I'm trying to scroll through. Frankie asks, could I please review a piece of information you mentioned about how the regular electrical wires can act as an antenna for 5G signals? Oh, I know what you're talking about. Okay, yes. I'm trying to think where, I think it's in this post. Give me 1 second. I can tell you where that is. Is there air gig? Yes, here it is. I got it. I found it. So if Frankie is still in the room, here is the answer to your question. That was an example. I'm sure there are other ones too. You know, I try to keep on top of this stuff. This was a reader, one of my list members who emailed me letting me know about AirGig. I hadn't heard about AirGig, and when she let me know, I did some research and I found out about it. And I'm sure there's other projects in development now, or possibly even being deployed, that we don't know about, because they're again, they just roll this stuff out without any testing, and so that's I'm sure there's a bunch more that we don't know about, but that's the post that covers on my site that covers AirGig. Thank you, Frankie. Martha asked for my thoughts on grounding and earthing. I hold on 1 second, please. I have a post that discusses that. So I'm going to post that in here, and then I'm going to answer. I believe that grounding and earthing is really helpful. It's a very healthy thing to do. And increasingly, especially if you live in cities, it's something that's difficult to do. My concern with grounding and earthing, well, okay, so I see your question specifically about on the ground connecting to the dirt. That is the way to do it. Is if you can ground or earth on the earth itself, that is the way to do it. My concern about grounding and earthing is a lot of these products, and I've considered doing some of them. I have a couple of great prototypes that I would love to bring to market, but my concern is when you ground into the power outlet, there are some potential unintended consequences there, in terms of conducting dirty electricity through the ground wire. And that's why so far I haven't released any grounding products. Now, if I find that my concerns are incorrect, or if I find that those concerns can be mitigated, then my thoughts on this will change. But grounding itself, like putting your feet on the earth, whether it's on the beach or at a park, that is a very important thing to do. If you can do it, I think everyone feels that it's you almost immediately feel the benefit. But there's actual science that supports that as well. And so my post that I shared has some of that. Thank you, Martha. Catherine says, regarding convincing skeptics, your attempt may be 2 conversations away from them changing their mind. It's cumulative. Just because you convince them doesn't mean your attempt isn't valuable. That's a really great point. Thank you, Catherine, for emphasizing that. I agree. Just because you haven't convinced them doesn't mean you haven't moved the ball forward. And that is important to remember, because it is a process, and you're going to be going through this process. Thank you, Catherine. Anand asks for research inputs of health hazards, especially for children. I have that. If you'll give me 1 second, please. Oh, wait up. Actually, I have a whole page with multiple. Hold on. I remember now. I would point you to this page, which is there. So shieldyourbody.com/EMF-children. David also pointed out ehtrust.org. That's a great site. That's the Environmental Health Trust run by Deborah Davis. That's a really good site as well. If you want specifically information about EMF in children, I have several posts on this page here on my website. So thank you, Anand. I unplug my router at night. Oh, sorry. Susan asks, I unplug my router at night from the outlet. Does this stop the EMF at that time? Yes. Yeah. If your router is unplugged, if you're talking about unplugging it from the wall, yeah, that'll stop all the EMF coming out from your router. Thank you, Susan. Mary asks about the discount. So if you just email into hello@shieldyourbody.com, we'll reply with a limited time use coupon for you. Thank you, Mary. Anand asks, is there a 5G and COVID correlation? If so, how can we present it without creating a controversy? In my opinion, there isn't. The science does not show that correlation, and the analyses that do show that correlation are flawed. That is my personal opinion. You'll find other people who disagree. I also find that if you know a topic is going to cause a controversy when you're trying to convince people to come to your side, avoid it. But personally, I do not see that correlation. Thank you. So I apologize. Celestine asks, can EMF go through a wall? Yes, EMF can go through a wall, unless that wall is made of shielding material or lead or something like that. EMF can go through a wall. Thank you. Stacy has a point here about a deadline today. I'm contacting the FCC I think I've been very busy today. I got this similar email today and I didn't have time because I was preparing for this webinar. If you guys want to look at Stacy's question here at the bottom, she has a link for you to follow. There is a comment period that's ending tonight. So if you're concerned about this, that's a good place to you can click that link and express your concern with the FCC. Thank you, Stacy. Okay. So with that, I know there's a couple other questions in the queue. We're running out of time in the room. There's a 2-hour limit on the room itself. So I just want to thank everyone for turning out today. I hope you felt this was worth your time. I definitely encourage you to go back and, does this work? Yeah. To go and read the guide that you're getting. It was emailed to you already. It'll be emailed to you again. A recording of this webinar is being emailed to you as soon as it's ready on the server. And you lost the 35% off discount on the bed canopy. I'd really encourage you to take advantage of that if you're interested in it, because it's very rare for me to offer 35% coupons for, normally the biggest I would do is a 25% coupon, but this is a new product. It's in pre-order. I understand it's also quite pricey compared to my normal catalog. So that's why I'm doing a discount that big today. So if you're interested in it, that goes until midnight tonight Pacific time, which is about 9 hours from now. So just enter Canopy 35 at checkout, and in the next 9 hours, if you're interested, and you'll be pre-ordering it, and it'll ship as soon as it's ready, and that'll be in August, if not sooner. So again, thank you everyone for coming out today. I really appreciate it. We had some really good participation. I loved the questions. And I want to remind you to please stay tuned, because the content that I shared, in this webinar and in this ebook, it's all the first step on a bigger set of content and tools for you to help you along this path. So stay tuned. If you're on the mailing, well, you are on the mailing list. So pay attention for the emails that are coming, and